Can she take David for a drink later? I've never had that question in both of them. No comment.
It's very kind, but I think I have to get home. But thank you.
Okay, so it's a question about the character at the end being a different character that kills Richard. Who would like to illuminate us on that one?
I think there's a slight sense that in the original text, he's killed by a character called Exton, who shows up sort of in the last 5 minutes to midnight in the play. He has no, we have no dramatic investment in him, and he kills Richard. It feels a little uninvested. It feels like Shakespeare meant it to be O'Merrill, I think, and I think we reached a sort of consensus on that. Otherwise, the whole scene with the king and the Yorks appealing to the king doesn't really go anywhere. It doesn't seem to have a dramatic purpose. As soon as we made O'Merrill the murderer, it just seemed to make it just seemed to bring O'Merrill's character and so much of the play itself into focus. I mean, we're not the first people to do it. It's been done in other productions before. And indeed other people have killed Richard in other productions, but it feels right. Certainly to me, it feels, dare I say it, that's what Shakespeare intended. You can postulate theories, you see, that, as indeed happened, for instance, in Henry IV Part 1, when Falstaff was originally called Oldcastle, and Shakespeare was made to change it to Falstaff because the Oldcastle family complained. You could postulate the theory that the Rutland family didn't like the idea of one of their ancestors being Richard's assassin, and it does feel like there's a hasty rewrite when Exton shows up. Obviously, we'll never know, but it feels to me that the play is more complete with O'Merrill as the murderer.
Okay, does anybody want to add? Okay, so it's a question about the production with Ian Richardson and
Richard Pascoe.
Thank you. Who famously swapped roles, and David has the ring. I mean, Greg is very keen on everybody knowing the history of the productions that have happened before, isn't it? So it's a question that anybody can answer, not just David.
Briefly, I mean, it's difficult to really get a sense of a performance if you never saw it. You can read accounts, but that's quite dry and difficult to really give you a sense of what that was. As you pointed out, Ian Richardson's widow Marussia very kindly gave me the ring that Ian wore when he played Richard II. On press night, in fact, in Stratford it arrived, and I was very touched and moved and feel very honoured to wear that ring during the show. So I guess my link to that production is I don't know, slightly more spiritual perhaps than had I seen, were there a film of it, I'm sure I'd be stealing lots of his ideas, but as it is, I can only imagine what they were.
Oh, and is it true that Greg gets you to look at all the cut versions of Richard II, of every play, as an assistant director? Is that a lie that I've invented?
It's a bit of a lie, but I can make it true if you want to. I know that Greg does, though. But also as well to say that when we were in Stratford, the Birthplace Trust actually made this incredible, laid out this table for us of all these kind of archive kind of artifacts from references to the plays. There's a letter from John of Gaunt there, and there's also the kind of pictures from all the previous productions at the RSC. And for me, it being my first time at the RSC, it was a wonderful thing to be able to see this play through the ages. And actually, this production that you're referencing is something that I was really interested in, this idea of switching the roles. And I would have loved to have seen that, so lucky you. But yeah, Greg himself now working on Henry IV, he actually went through all the different cuts, more out of curiosity, I think, than anything else.
And also, you're very lucky to have somebody who's very well versed in the history of Richard II, aren't you, Oliver? I mean, you did
Yes. My special subject at Oxford was Richard II and John the Good, which involves reading. There are 6 chronicles, rolls of Parliament, and one other thing. It involves you reading just over 1,000 pages of medieval Latin, which there were no translations in those days. So it's all gone, I'm afraid. But I do remember, and got very boring in rehearsal of pointing out quite who the appellants were and why he wanted to exile Mowbray and Bolingbroke. Can I just add something about the production 40 years ago? It's interesting that they had, as it were, an identical production for Richard Pascoe and Ian Richardson, but they interpreted the parts quite differently. Richard being a noble actor and Ian being a somewhat devious actor. Ian definitely thought that Bolingbroke had come back for the crown. And Richard thought, no, I didn't intend that at all. And Ian, I think, thought Richard was really asking for it. And Richard thought, no, he wasn't at all. So you had 2 quite contrasting versions, which the text will allow you to go either way, which is fascinating.
Which did you see Ian Richardson as the king? I saw both. You saw both? Yeah. Which was best?
But not as good as yours, then. Sorry, I stopped your punchline with mine. Right, a lady over here, yes. One question.
The costumes were all amazing. And were you given rehearsal care? And what changed when you finally were able to do that dress rehearsal?
Okay, so a question about costumes and how much costume you have in a rehearsal room and how much that affects.
Well, it all started. No. We didn't have costume while we were rehearsing. We were just sort of. Our rehearsal rooms in Clapham were kind of mostly bare, and we just had a sort of a tape outline of the stage you see now. So everything was sort of up to our imagination. We did have a sort of a platform like you see here, but not as grand. And we did have the coffin at the beginning of the scene, but everything was sort of up to our imagination. So, but it was great because, by the time you get on the stage for real and you put on the costumes and you sort of feel the character, everything that you've been learning beforehand sort of comes into place. So it was good that we were sort of denied a lot of those things that you see on the stage, that we were just sort of concentrating on the text, on the play, our relationships to each other, our interrelationships, and hopefully it all connected really well. So yeah.
I need to add something here from the Thugs' point of view, because we did have costumes. Those boys didn't, but I always make sure I have something to do with the character to help me. I need all the help I can get at the beginning, and I had the gloves and the sword, and then I started wearing the long coats because it just gives you a little feel in rehearsal of what it might be like. Northumberland decided to wear one iron glove for the entire rehearsal period. He really got into that glove until I asked him whether he was actually allowed to wear one glove on stage the whole time, but that was obviously nixed at the last minute. But I think because you're playing when we're playing soldiers, as you're playing favourites, maybe you don't need the costumes so much because they're more simple. But if I'm playing a soldier, I like to have a sword on. It just makes you walk differently in rehearsals. And anyway, just thought I'd add that.
We wear we call them practice skirts in rehearsal. So, like Nigel was saying, just to give you a feel of you walk differently when you're in a long full skirt. And turn, you need more space to turn and things like that. We had Jane Lapater, who's an expert in how to work a period costume, so she was constantly giving us tips on how to move, which is good. But then when we got into the tech, the most amazing thing was seeing each other, I think, in costume and how that makes you react. Suddenly seeing the guys in their suits of armour is quite intimidating, and that's useful reaction to have. And the hair for us was gave us like a good posture, and it's sort of like our corset. Gracie and I say that the hair that we have, it pulls us up tall. Rehearsal hair, David did come in one day, unannounced, suddenly. And we were in the middle of a warm-up, I think, and we were all bent over like this. And I looked up and I was like, who is that? I could just see this massive long hair. And Richard was born at that point.
I didn't have a practice skirt, but I should have done, because actually it's one of the hardest things to get used to, and I should have been practicing a lot more than I did. And backstage at the Barbican, you've never known so many stairs. And of course, during performance, you don't want to use the lift, so there's about 5 flights of stairs between the dressing rooms and the stage, which you have to go up and down, knows how many times every night. And hoiking all those skirts up high enough so that you don't stand on your hem. It's very unregal.
I was just wondering to all the cast, if you could play a Shakespeare character, say tomorrow on the Coalition Span Shakespeare. If you could play
Which I think they're thinking about.
Anyway, if you could play one more character, either again or for the first time from Shakespeare, to everyone, who would that be?
Okay, so the question is for the whole cast, if tomorrow would be the last day, what Shakespeare character would you play? Have you played before?
Desdemona. I'm lying. Iago, definitely.
So I'm going to say the first thing that came into my mind, which was Hermione.
Juliet.
I might say Iago too, but you've already said that, so I'll say Malvolio.
What would I like to direct? Titus Andronicus.
Coriolanus.
Iago.
I'll stick to Polonius.
This is so difficult. Lady there in the big jacket again. Yes,
this is for the cast as well. I don't know how much Shakespeare everyone's done, but what do you prefer, tragedy, comedy, or history?
what do you prefer, tragedy, comedy, or history? Hands up for tragedy. Hands up for comedy. And history.
I think it's reductive to put them into categories.
Gentlemen in the red t-shirt.
Question Steve, for all of you. Are there any practitioners or authors you know that you can say have influenced you at all in the rehearsal process, either this show or previous shows?
Okay, so practitioners that have influenced you as an actor, either during this show or somewhere else in your career.
I think it would probably have to be Sis Berry, which is ironic, seeing as we're here at the RSC. But I remember when I was a teenager going to see, to experience a workshop at the National Theatre, and Sis Berry was taking that workshop at the Cottesloe Theatre. So it was a very intimate, square stage, and there were a couple of actors on there, and she handed us out some excerpts from Macbeth. And wherever we were sat, whether it was the galleries or ground level, we had to speak the text and whisper it and do lots of dynamic things with the text. And I think at that point, probably, I very much fell in love with Cis Berry and Shakespeare and what she was, the effect that it was having on all of us, the actors on stage as well as the audience. So, yeah, Cis Berry.
Books are still available. I'm going to go up there, yes. Dark hair.
It's like pass the parcel, this. I've now got the microphone.
Is it different trying to create a role that's based within history, so creating, say, Richard II, or from creating something straight out of imagination? And if so, does going about to these sort of amazing places help you with that, or do you have a way in?
That's a very good question. And what's the answer? The answer is that, personally, I mean, Bolingbroke was obviously a real person. It's very nice when you are playing someone real because there is some solid research there that can help you. But these people lived so long ago that them being real people doesn't really impinge upon me. Hang on. Having said that, going to the places that we went to was really, really helpful. But you just look for any help that you can possibly get. Sometimes you're a bit freer playing someone who didn't exist because you can put your own interpretation on them, especially if you're doing a new play. I find the biggest burden with doing plays like Richard II, or if you do Hamlet or something, you know of all the people that have done it before you rather than the actual character themselves. So, but it's nice to have some solid research to fall back on, I suppose.
Except when you're 6.
Except when you're 6? What do you mean?
I'm meant to be 6.
But we can see that in the performance. It's wonderful how you do that.
I'm very thorough in my research.
But in terms of Shakespeare, it's from the writer's point of view, isn't it? They're not true factual.
That's a very good point as well. Yeah, Shakespeare, he was writing in Elizabethan times, so we kept coming because Oliver is the fount of all knowledge, as he says about Richard II, and he came up with some very interesting points in rehearsal. But Greg kept pointing out to us that we're not playing the history, we're playing the play. They're two very different things, and so you play the lines in front of you, and whether that character existed or not, it doesn't really matter. You're playing the lines on the page, really. You're getting the character from that. Although, having said that, there was an amazing book that someone introduced me to, written by a guy called Adam of Usk, who actually travelled with Bolingbroke and was there when he came back from exile. And to read that, it's just unbelievable. To read a book, a sort of chronicle of a man who stood next to Bolingbroke and who said he was there in the prison when they visited Richard. That just gives you prickles down your back, and that really helps.
We've got time for one question. You were very quick there, yes.
Oh, okay. So first of all, you guys were all amazing, but I'm sure you get talked about in Doctor Who a lot. I just want to know, I'm a big songwriter, and I wrote songs for almost like every character. I just want to know if you want to have them.
It would be ingallant to say no. I'd love to, yeah.
Right, next question.
This is mainly to David. How much do you become your character, and do you dream in Shakespeare? How much do you become your character? I mean, there are different scales of actors, but how much do each of you actually?
And what was the second bit?
Do you dream in Shakespeare?
Do I dream of Shakespeare? In Shakespeare? In iambic pentameter? I wish I were that eloquent. I wish I could. I do wake up in the middle of the night going over lines sometimes. The rhythms do get in your brain. I don't know about that, and it's a question you often get asked as an actor, and I always think not at all. I always think I sort of leave it at work. But actually, I think it's probably a question for those around me to answer, rather than me, because it's quite hard to be objective about how... Yeah, Nigel and I did a play called The Pillowman at the National Theatre years ago, in which Nigel played a nasty piece of work. Do you want to talk about that, Nigel?
I just wanted to say that when we did the Pillar Man, I basically spent the entire play torturing David with electrodes, and it was great fun. And I was told by my family that I brought him home quite a lot.
So yeah, it's difficult to know. I mean, I'm living with this, which I think deserves a prize. But it's the maintenance. I don't know how you do it. It's just the washing and the brushing, the endless brushing. 2.5 weeks. What, some scraggy old bits of hair? There you go. I don't know, who'll be the next Richard II? There you go. Colin Morgan, have some scraggy old bits of hair. That'll sort you out, young fella of a lad. I think I'll pass the ring on before I pass the scraggy hair on.
Unfortunately, on the hair, we're going to have to leave it there. But I'd like to thank the Barbican staff who have stayed on, the cast for staying on, and you for staying on.